Sarah Matthews stood in front of her bathroom mirror in her London hotel room, carefully applying the last touches of makeup. The 42-year-old American tourist had been planning this trip for months, and today was going to be the highlight of her London vacation, seeing the famous changing of the guard ceremony at Buckingham Palace. She had watched countless videos of the ceremony on YouTube and was determined to get the perfect photos for her social media accounts. This will show Jennifer from Book Club what a real international traveler looks like, Sarah muttered to herself as she adjusted her expensive designer sunglasses. Her friend Jennifer had visited London last year and wouldn't stop talking about it at their weekly meetings. Sarah was sure she could do better. The morning was bright and sunny, unusual for London in early spring. Sarah checked her phone's weather app one more time, not a cloud in sight. Perfect conditions for photography. She grabbed her new designer handbag, making sure her portable phone charger was packed. She wasn't going to risk running out of battery before getting her perfect shot. When Sarah arrived at Buckingham Palace, the crowd was already thick with tourists. People from all over the world stood chatting excitedly in different languages, their cameras and phones ready. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, trying to get a better view. But Sarah wasn't interested in joining the regular tourist spots. "Excuse me, coming through," she called out, pushing past a family with small children. "I need to get to the front." Several people gave her annoyed looks, but Sarah didn't notice. She was focused on finding what she considered the perfect spot. A rope barrier marked the official marching route of the Queen's Guard. Clear signs in multiple languages warned visitors to stay behind the barrier. Sarah read the signs but decided they didn't apply to her. After all, she had paid a lot of money for this vacation, and she deserved the best possible photos. "Miss, you can't stand there," a local tour guide named James Wilson said politely. He had been leading tours at Buckingham Palace for 15 years and had seen his share of difficult tourists. "The guards will be marching through this exact spot in about 20 minutes. Sarah turned to him with a practiced smile she usually reserved for junior employees at her office. "Oh, don't worry about me," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "I'm sure they can walk around. It's just for a few photos." James tried again. "You don't understand. The Queen's Guard never stops or changes their route. It's their duty and tradition. They will walk straight through, and you could get hurt." But Sarah had already turned away, focusing on her phone's camera settings. She opened Instagram and did a test selfie, making sure the palace was perfectly framed behind her. A young British couple standing nearby exchanged worried glances. More people noticed Sarah's position and began murmuring. Some took out their phones, but not to photograph the palace. They could sense something interesting was about to happen. A few started recording videos, anticipating what would occur when the guards arrived. "My followers are going to love this," Sarah said to herself as she heard the drums begin in the distance. The ceremonial music grew louder, and excitement rippled through the crowd. Parents lifted their children higher. Phones and cameras rose into the air. Sarah checked her appearance one last time in her phone's front camera. Her designer outfit was perfect. The red dress would look amazing against the palace background. Her blonde highlights caught the sunlight just right. This was exactly the kind of photo that would get hundreds of likes. The drums grew louder, and the first glimpses of red uniforms and tall bearskin hats appeared in the distance. The crowd's excitement built as the guards approached in their famous formation. Their boots hit the ground in perfect rhythm, creating a sound that echoed off the palace walls. Several more people tried to warn Sarah. A mother with 2 children begged her to move back. A palace security guard started walking in her direction. But Sarah Matthews stood firm in her chosen spot, right in the path of the oncoming Queen's Guard, her phone held high and a confident smile on her face. She had no idea that in the next few minutes, she would become famous for all the wrong reasons, and her perfect London vacation photo would turn into something very different from what she had planned. The crowd around Buckingham Palace grew larger with each passing minute. The excitement in the air was electric as hundreds of tourists pressed against the barriers, all eager to witness the famous changing of the guard ceremony. But no one was drawing more attention than Sarah Matthews, who continued to stand defiantly in the guard's marching path. James Wilson, the experienced tour guide, watched the situation with growing concern. In his 15 years of leading tours, he had seen tourists make many mistakes, but this was different. He approached Sarah one more time, his voice carrying a new urgency. "Ma'am, I really must insist you move back behind the barrier," he said, pointing to the clearly marked line. The guards are not street performers. They are active duty soldiers with a serious job to do. Sarah rolled her eyes and checked her phone again. "Look," she said, speaking slowly as if explaining something to a child. "I'm an American citizen. I pay taxes that probably help support your whole country. I'm sure they can walk a few steps to the left." A small crowd had gathered near Sarah, many holding their phones up, not to photograph the palace or the approaching guards, but to record what was quickly becoming a scene. Among them was a young British couple, Tom and Emma Parker, who had been visiting London for their anniversary. "Should we say something to her?" Emma whispered to her husband. Tom shook his head. "The guards will handle it. They deal with this kind of thing all the time." A group of Japanese tourists who had been standing quietly behind the barrier began whispering among themselves, pointing at Sarah and shaking their heads. They had done their research before visiting and knew exactly what was about to happen. The ceremonial drums grew louder, their deep rhythm echoing off the palace walls. Sarah's heart beat faster with excitement as she saw more tourists raising their cameras. She thought they were preparing to photograph the guards, not realizing she had become the main attraction. A palace security guard named Robert Thompson had been watching the situation unfold. He made his way through the crowd toward Sarah, his walkie-talkie crackling with updates about the guard's approach. "Miss," Robert called out, his voice firm but professional, "this is your final warning. You are standing in a restricted area. The Queen's Guard will not stop or alter their route. Please move behind the barrier immediately." Sarah turned to face him, her designer sunglasses flashing in the sunlight. "I'd like to speak to your supervisor," she said, reaching into her bag for her phone. "I'm going to record this. I know my rights." The crowd had grown even larger now. Parents quickly pulled their children back from the barrier, knowing what was coming. A group of teenagers nearby started a live stream, the commentary filled with anticipation. The hashtag Buckingham Palace Karen was already spreading across social media platforms. The drums were very close now. The first glint of the guards' polished buttons could be seen in the distance. Their red uniforms stood out brilliantly against the palace's pale walls. The sound of their synchronized footsteps joined the drumbeat in a powerful rhythm that seemed to shake the ground. James made one last attempt to prevent the inevitable. "Please," he said to Sarah, "you don't understand. These guards are part of the British Army. They're not going to break formation for photos." "Well, they should learn to be more accommodating to tourists," Sarah replied, adjusting her hair and practicing her smile. "We're the ones who keep this place in business." A hush fell over the crowd as the first line of guards appeared around the corner. Their movements were precise, their faces stern and focused. The sun gleamed off their ceremonial rifles and the brass buttons of their uniforms. The bearskin hats made them look even taller and more imposing than they already were. Sarah held her phone up high, completely oblivious to the tension around her. Several people in the crowd had started recording with their phones, knowing they were about to witness something memorable. The guards drew closer and closer, their unwavering march bringing them straight toward where Sarah stood. The lead guard's voice rang out, clear and commanding. "Make way for the Queen's Guard." Sarah Matthews stood her ground, her phone steady in her hands, her smile fixed in place. She was about to learn a very public lesson about respect, tradition, and the unwavering dedication of the Queen's Guard to their duty. The Queen's Guard marched forward in perfect formation, their polished boots striking the ground in perfect unison. Each step brought them closer to where Sarah Matthews stood, her phone held high in the air. The crowd watched in a mixture of horror and fascination as the inevitable confrontation approached. "Make way for the Queen's Guard," the lead guard shouted again, his voice even louder this time. The command echoed off the palace walls, causing several nearby pigeons to scatter into the air. Still, Sarah didn't move. "They're just trying to scare me," she whispered to herself, adjusting her designer sunglasses with her free hand. "They'll have to walk around me. I'm an American citizen." The guards were now just 15 feet away. Their red uniforms seemed to glow in the morning sunlight, and their ceremonial rifles gleamed. The lead guard's face remained perfectly stern, focused straight ahead as years of training had taught him. Behind their bearskin hats, each guard's eyes were fixed forward, showing no sign of deviating from their path. 10 feet away now, the drums continued their steady rhythm, matching the guard's unwavering march. A child in the crowd pointed and tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mummy, "Why isn't the lady moving?" he asked loudly. Several people shushed him, not wanting to miss what was about to happen. James Wilson, the tour guide, had backed away to a safe distance. He shook his head sadly, knowing his warnings had fallen on deaf ears. Next to him, Tom and Emma Parker held their phones steady, recording everything. The live stream comments were flooding in from around the world. 5 feet remained between Sarah and the guards. The lead guard's voice rang out one final time. "Make way." Sarah's smile began to falter slightly. The guards were much taller up close, their presence more intimidating than she had expected. Still, she convinced herself they would stop. They had to stop. She was a paying tourist after all. 3 feet. 2 feet. 1. The lead guard's shoulder made contact with Sarah's arm. The force of his continuing march sent her stumbling sideways, her designer sunglasses flying off her face. Her expensive phone slipped from her grasp, clattering onto the pavement as she struggled to regain her balance. "Hey," she shouted, her voice a mixture of shock and outrage. "You can't do that. I'll sue." But the guards continued their march, moving past her as if she were nothing more than a lamppost in their path. Their boots continued their steady rhythm, and the drums played on. Not a single guard turned their head or acknowledged her presence. Sarah's face turned bright red as she heard snickers from the crowd. Her hands shook as she bent to retrieve her phone, discovering a large crack across its screen. Her sunglasses lay a few feet away, one lens popped out of its frame. "Did you see that?" she demanded, turning to the nearest spectators. "They assaulted me. Someone call the police." A police officer who had been watching the whole scene stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "you were warned multiple times to clear the path. The Queen's Guard has right of way here, and interfering with their duty is actually an offense." Sarah's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. Around her, dozens of phones were still recording. The crowd had grown even larger, drawn by the commotion. Some people were openly laughing now, while others shook their heads in disapproval. But, Sarah stammered, her carefully applied makeup now smeared from sweat and tears of embarrassment. "They're just guards for show, aren't they? For tourists?" The police officer's face remained serious. "No, ma'am. They are active duty soldiers of the British Army tasked with guarding the royal residences. This isn't an amusement park attraction." In the distance, the guards continued their march, their formation as perfect as ever. They disappeared around the corner of the palace, the sound of drums fading gradually. But Sarah's humiliation was far from over. "Oh my God," she heard someone in the crowd say, "this is already trending on Twitter." Sarah looked around desperately, suddenly aware that her moment of defiance had been captured from dozens of angles. Her perfect London photo opportunity had turned into something very different, and her social media fame was about to begin, just not in the way she had planned. Time seemed to slow down for Sarah Matthews as she sat on a nearby bench, her hands trembling as she examined her cracked phone screen. The past 15 minutes felt like a blur, but the reality of what had just happened was starting to sink in. Around her, the crowd that had witnessed her confrontation with the Queen's Guard was still buzzing with excitement. "Are you all right, ma'am?" asked Robert Thompson, the palace security guard, offering her a paper cup of water. His voice was professional, but carried a hint of "I told you so" that made Sarah's cheeks burn even hotter with embarrassment. Sarah took a small sip of water, noticing that her expensive lipstick had left a smudge on the cup's rim. Her perfect makeup was now ruined, with mascara streaks running down her cheeks from the few tears she'd shed in shock. The designer dress she'd chosen so carefully for her photos was dusty from her stumble. Nearby, a group of teenagers huddled around their phones, giggling and pointing in her direction. Sarah could hear snippets of their conversation, already at 50,000 views. "The hashtag is trending. Wait till Reddit sees this." The police officer who had spoken to her earlier, Constable Michael Bennett, was now taking notes in a small notebook. "For the record, Ms. Matthews," he said, "would you like to file a formal complaint? Though I should warn you, the video evidence clearly shows you were in violation of multiple posted regulations." Sarah's mouth opened to say yes, but then closed again as the reality of her situation dawned on her. "No," she said quietly, looking down at her scraped designer heels. "No complaint." Tom and Emma Parker, the young British couple who had recorded everything, approached hesitantly. Emma held Sarah's broken sunglasses in her hands. We found these a few feet away, Emma said kindly. One lens is a bit scratched, but they might still be fixable. Sarah took the sunglasses, her hands still shaking slightly. The expensive frames were bent, and the popped-out lens had a long scratch across it, just like her phone, just like her pride. Everything was cracked and damaged. I just wanted a good photo, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't think they would actually. I mean, they could have just walked around me. James Wilson, the tour guide who had tried to warn her multiple times, stepped forward. His face showed concern rather than judgment. The Queen's Guard has been performing this ceremony since 1660, he explained gently. Their dedication to duty isn't for show. It's a solemn responsibility they take very seriously. Sarah's phone buzzed in her hand, making her jump. The cracked screen displayed a message from her sister back in America. Sarah, are you okay? You're all over Facebook. What happened? More notifications began popping up. Friends, coworkers, even her boss had somehow already seen the videos. The hashtag Buckingham Palace Karen was spreading like wildfire across social media platforms, and her face was becoming more recognizable by the minute. A young boy who had been watching the whole scene tugged at his father's sleeve. Dad, why did the lady think she was more important than the Queen's soldiers? He asked loudly. Several people nearby tried to hide their smiles. Sarah's face burned with fresh embarrassment. She stood up suddenly, gathering her belongings, the cracked phone, the broken sunglasses, the scuffed designer bag. I should go, she said to no one in particular. As she walked away from Buckingham Palace, she could still hear the distant drums of the changing of the guard ceremony continuing without interruption. The guards who had knocked her aside were probably already at their next position, their duty unaffected by the small drama they'd left in their wake. Back at the scene, people were already taking selfies at the spot where she'd stood, reenacting her confrontation with imaginary guards. Tour guides were using her example to warn their groups about respecting the ceremony's traditions. And somewhere in the palace, the Queen's Guard continued their ancient duty, marching with the same precision and dedication they had shown for centuries, unmoved by the brief interruption to their routine. Sarah's perfect London photo opportunity had turned into something very different, a viral moment that would follow her long after her vacation ended, teaching her and thousands of others a valuable lesson about respect, tradition, and the consequences of entitlement. Sarah Matthews sat alone in her hotel room, staring at her laptop screen in horror. Just 3 hours had passed since her confrontation with the Queen's Guard, but the internet had been very busy during that time. Her hands shook as she scrolled through what felt like endless social media posts about her. American tourist versus Queen's Guard, Guard wins. Read one viral video title with over 2 million views. The comments section was filled with thousands of people laughing at her expense. Someone had even created a remix video set to dramatic music, with her stumble played in slow motion. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since she returned to the hotel. Even with its cracked screen, she could see the flood of notifications. WhatsApp messages from her book club members, concerned emails from coworkers, and worst of all, a message from her boss. Sarah, we need to talk about your viral moment. Please call me ASAP. A knock at her hotel room door made her jump. Room service called out a friendly voice. Sarah had ordered tea and sandwiches, not feeling brave enough to face the hotel's dining room. As the young server wheeled in the cart, Sarah noticed his eyes widening in recognition. Oh my, are you the lady from the palace today? He asked, then quickly added, Sorry, that was unprofessional of me. Sarah nodded miserably, handing him a tip. Yes, that was me. I suppose everyone in London has seen it by now. The server hesitated at the door. If it helps, my sister did something similar last year at Tower Bridge. The internet forgets quickly. He gave her a sympathetic smile before leaving. But the internet wasn't forgetting. Hashtag Buckingham Palace Karen had reached #1 trending topic in the UK, and it was spreading to other countries. News websites were picking up the story, with headlines like Tourist Learns Hard Lesson About Queen's Guard Protocol and American Karen Meets British Tradition. Guess who wins? Sarah's sister Amy called on FaceTime, her face filled with concern. Sarah, are you okay? Mom's worried sick, and Dad can't stop watching the videos. I'm fine, Sarah replied, though her voice cracked slightly. Just humiliated. Everyone thinks I'm this horrible, entitled person. They're calling me Karen of Buckingham Palace. There are memes, Amy, memes. Well, Amy hesitated. You did kind of act like a Karen, sis. What were you thinking, standing in their way? Sarah sank deeper into the hotel room's armchair. I wasn't thinking. I just wanted the perfect photo for social media. You know, like Jennifer's pictures from her London trip last year. I wanted mine to be better. As she spoke, her laptop pinged with a new notification. Someone had found her professional LinkedIn profile and shared it. Now people were leaving comments on her company's social media pages, making jokes about hiring entitled employees. Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from James Wilson, the tour guide who had tried to warn her. Hi, Ms. Matthews. I hope you're doing all right. If you'd like, I can explain more about the history and importance of the Queen's Guard. Might help with understanding today's events. Looking out her hotel room window at the London skyline, Sarah felt tears welling up again. But these weren't tears of humiliation like before, they were tears of realization. She had traveled all the way to London, spent thousands of dollars, and ruined her vacation, all because she wanted to show off on social media. The TV in her room was playing BBC News, and suddenly she saw her own face on the screen. The newsreader was discussing today's viral moment at Buckingham Palace, with a panel of experts talking about tourism, respect for traditions, and social media behavior. Sarah picked up her cracked phone and started typing a response to James. Yes, please. I'd like to learn. I think I have a lot to understand about respect and tradition. As the London sunset painted the sky orange outside her window, Sarah Matthews began to realize that her viral moment might teach her more than any perfect photo ever could. Tomorrow, she would have to face the consequences of her actions, her boss's call, the continuing social media storm, and her own damaged reputation. But for now, she was ready to learn from someone who had tried to help her before it all went wrong. The next morning, Sarah Matthews woke up to find that her viral moment had grown even bigger overnight. Her incident at Buckingham Palace had spread far beyond British borders, reaching news outlets and social media platforms worldwide. As she opened her laptop, she saw her face on major news websites from Australia to Canada. The YouTube video of her confrontation with the Queen's Guard had reached 5 million views. Late-night TV show hosts in America were making jokes about her, and morning shows wanted to interview her. Her phone displayed over 100 missed calls, including several from morning news programs and radio stations. This is a nightmare, Sarah muttered, pushing aside the untouched breakfast tray she'd ordered to her room. She hadn't left her hotel room since yesterday's incident, too afraid to face the public. The hotel staff had been kind enough to bring her meals, though she noticed they'd always sent different servers, probably to avoid awkward encounters. Her boss had left 3 voicemail messages. With trembling hands, Sarah finally listened to them. The first 2 requested urgent callbacks, but the third one made her heart sink. Sarah, given the viral nature of your incident and its impact on our company's image, we need to discuss your position. Please call immediately. Just then, her phone rang again. It was James Wilson, the tour guide she'd messaged last night. Good morning, Ms. Matthews, he said kindly when she answered. I thought you might like to get out of your hotel room. I know a quiet cafe where we could talk about the guard's history. No tourists, no cameras. Sarah hesitated, looking at her reflection in the hotel room mirror. Her designer clothes from yesterday were replaced with simple jeans and a plain sweater. Won't people recognize me? She asked quietly. Trust me, James replied. Londoners are very good at minding their own business. An hour later, Sarah sat in a corner of a small, cozy cafe in a quiet London street, far from the tourist areas. James had ordered them both proper English tea, and the cafe owner had kindly placed them at a table away from the windows. The Queen's Guard has been protecting the royal family for over 350 years, James explained, showing Sarah historical photos on his tablet. These soldiers are not just ceremonial figures. They're elite members of the British Army with real military duties. As James spoke, Sarah's phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had created a parody Twitter account called Buckingham Palace Karen that already had 50,000 followers. The latest meme showed her face photoshopped onto famous historical paintings, trying to block various historical figures. I never knew, Sarah said, pushing her phone face down on the table. I thought they were just there for tourists, like characters at Disneyland. I feel so stupid now. James showed her more photos. Guards standing at attention in pouring rain, maintaining their posts during snowstorms, performing their duties with unwavering dedication. Their commitment to duty isn't about being rude to tourists, he explained. It's about honor, tradition, and service. As they talked, Sarah's phone kept buzzing. Her sister had texted that Ellen DeGeneres' show wanted to interview her. Good Morning America had emailed. Even her local news station back home wanted to cover the story. Everyone wants to make fun of me, Sarah said, feeling tears well up again. I'm going to lose my job, and my reputation is ruined. All because I wanted to show off on social media. James considered this for a moment, stirring his tea. Or, he said thoughtfully, you could use this attention to teach others what you've learned. Turn this viral moment into something positive. Sarah looked up from her tea, a new idea forming in her mind. You mean, I could help prevent other tourists from making the same mistake? Exactly, James nodded. Your story has everyone's attention. Why not use it to spread understanding instead of just embarrassment? For the first time since the incident, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. She picked up her phone and opened her social media accounts. Instead of hiding from the viral storm, maybe she could ride it out in a different way. With James's help, she began drafting a message. Not an angry defense or a tearful apology, but an honest reflection about respect, tradition, and the lessons she learned from her encounter with the Queen's Guard. 1 week after the incident at Buckingham Palace, Sarah Matthews sat in her hotel room one last time, preparing for her flight back to America. Her open laptop displayed her latest social media post, which had gone viral for very different reasons than her original encounter with the Queen's Guard. A lesson in respect. What I learned from the Queen's Guard had been shared over 100,000 times. The post included historical information about the Guard that James had taught her, along with a heartfelt message about respecting other cultures and traditions. She had even included proper guidelines for tourists visiting Buckingham Palace. Your story really made a difference, James said, helping Sarah with her luggage. He had become a good friend over the past week, teaching her about British history and traditions. The palace staff told me they'd noticed tourists being more respectful since your post went viral. Sarah smiled, remembering how different she had been just a week ago. Her designer sunglasses and expensive handbag were packed away, replaced by a more humble attitude and a genuine appreciation for British culture. The crack in her phone screen remained unrepaired. She had decided to keep it as a reminder of her lesson. Her sister Amy called just as they were leaving the hotel. You won't believe this, Amy said excitedly. Your interview with BBC News about tourist responsibility has gone viral in the States. People are actually having serious discussions about respect and cultural awareness when traveling. The interview had been Sarah's idea, suggested during her tea with James. Instead of hiding from the media, she had chosen to speak openly about her mistake and what she had learned. The result had surprised everyone. Instead of more mockery, people had responded with understanding and respect for her honesty. Ms. Matthews called the hotel manager as Sarah walked through the lobby. There's someone here who would like to meet you. To Sarah's surprise, Tom and Emma Parker, the young couple who had recorded her confrontation with the guards, stepped forward. We saw your educational posts, Emma said warmly. We've been sharing them with our followers. It's amazing how you turned this whole thing around. Even Sarah's workplace situation had improved. After seeing her positive response to the incident and the constructive discussion she had started, her boss had called again. Instead of firing her, they wanted her to lead a new company initiative about cultural sensitivity and international business relations. Outside the hotel, a small group of tourists recognized her, but instead of pointing and laughing, they asked for her advice about visiting the palace. Sarah found herself sharing everything she had learned about the guards' history and the importance of respecting their duty. Remember, she told them, these aren't tourist attractions. They're active duty soldiers with a proud tradition of service. The best photos are the ones that respect their space and dignity. James accompanied Sarah to the airport in a taxi. Looking out at the London streets, she thought about how differently her vacation had turned out from what she had planned. Her perfect social media photos hadn't happened, but she had gained something much more valuable. You know, James said as they neared the airport, you've probably taught more people about the Queen's Guard in the past week than I have in years of giving tours. At the airport departure gate, Sarah checked her latest social media statistics one last time. The hashtag Buckingham Palace Karen was still trending, but now it was accompanied by hashtag respectful tourism and hashtag learned my lesson. Her educational posts had reached millions of people worldwide. Thank you, James, Sarah said, giving her friend a hug goodbye. I came to London looking for the perfect photo opportunity, but I found something better, a lesson in humility and respect. As her plane took off from London, Sarah looked out the window at the city below. Somewhere down there, the Queen's Guard was continuing their centuries-old tradition, marching with the same dedication and discipline they had always shown. But thanks to her viral moment and its aftermath, more tourists would now watch them with understanding and respect rather than treating them as mere photo opportunities. Sarah Matthews had arrived in London as an entitled tourist seeking social media fame. She was leaving as someone who had learned valuable lessons about respect, tradition, and the power of turning mistakes into opportunities for growth. Her viral moment would be remembered not just for the confrontation with the guard, but for the positive change it had inspired in tourists around the world.